You're standing on a ship, watching the sea stretch out in a flat, indifferent gray, and a jagged white tip breaks the surface, a tiny iceberg that hints at something massive lurking beneath. That image is exactly how Hemingway built A Farewell to Arms. He never tells you what to feel, he drops a line about rain on a window, a brief exchange between Frederick and Catherine. A soldier's tremor-filled cigarette, and trusts you to feel the weight of everything he leaves unsaid. The iceberg theory means only a sliver of the story is visible, the rest hidden in the dark water below. And the novel's real power lives in that submerged mass drama, meaninglessness, love in the face of death. Take the scene where Frederick Henry sits beside Catherine Barclay in a quiet Milan hotel room. The war is a distant rumble, at least for a moment. He says, "I wish we could be together always." She answers, "We are together now." No grand speeches, no poetic vows, just two words. The silence that hangs between them does the heavy lifting. You sense the borrowed time, the looming return of artillery, the inevitability of loss. Hemingway doesn't need to spell it out, the empty space between the lines screams louder than any melodrama could. That is the iceberg theory in action, the power isn't in the words, it's in the gaps. It isn't a gimmick, it's a philosophy. If you know your subject intimately, you can strip away the excess and still convey the truth. Hemingway chiseled his prose like a sculptor, removing everything that didn't serve the core. We never get a long, reflective monologue about Frederick's hatred for the war. Instead, we see the mud on a road, hear artillery crack in the distance, watch a soldier light a cigarette with shaking hands. Those details are fingerprints of something larger: fear, exhaustion, the slow erosion of belief. The horror isn't described, it's implied, and that implication feels more real because we have to fill the void ourselves. Even the dialogue feels deliberately spare. A conversation about food or weather seems trivial, but beneath that surface hums a constant anxiety. When Catherine says, "I'm not a bit brave," and Frederick replies, "Yes, you are," it sounds like comfort, yet you can feel the dread underneath. They cling to each other in a world that keeps proving love is fragile against death. The stripped-down language makes the emotional vacuum even more palpable. Like a room stripped of furniture, everything feels too quiet, too empty. That emptiness is the war, the loss, the modernist view that old certainties, honor, glory, patriotism have been blown apart, leaving only silence. Repetition reinforces the iceberg. Phrases like, "the war," "the rain," "I love you," become mantras, anchors in a sea of uncertainty. Rain isn't just weather, it becomes a symbol of sorrow, inevitability, the world's indifference. It pours when Frederick deserts the army, drizzles as he and Catherine flee to Switzerland, and lashes relentlessly as she dies in childbirth. Hemingway never declares, "Rain means death." He simply shows it over and over until you can't separate the sound of falling water from the feeling of loss. The surface stays calm, the depths churn. The novel's structure mirrors this technique. It reads like a memoir, Frederick looking back, narrating in a flat, almost detached voice. He doesn't scream, he doesn't collapse. He reports what happened, and that restraint makes the pain sharper. When Catherine dies, his line is, "But after I had got them out and shut the door and turned off the light, it wasn't any good. It was like saying goodbye to a statue." No tears, no collapse, just a cold, quiet image that tears you apart because you know he's empty, destroyed, yet unable to vocalize it. In that silence Hemingway forces us to confront the darkest idea of the book. At the end there is nothing, no meaning, no justice, no happy resolution, just the nada that swallows everything, even love. So the iceberg isn't merely a stylistic trick, it's a way of getting at truth. Real emotion is too deep, too tangled to be neatly packaged. You can't describe grief, you can only show a man walking back to his hotel in the rain, alone. You can't explain the absurdity of war, you can only show soldiers dying for a hill that will be taken back the next day. You can't capture the fragility of wartime love with poetry, you can only give us two people holding hands, whispering, "I love you," like a prayer, knowing it might not be enough. The genius of A Farewell to Arms is that it says almost nothing, and in doing so, it says everything. The silence after Catherine's death is not just emotional, it is metaphysical. Frederick walks back to his hotel in the rain, and the world does not pause. No bells toll. No stars shift. The war continues elsewhere, unseen but ever present, like a hum beneath reality. This absence of cosmic response is central to Hemingway's vision. There is no divine order, no moral balance, no poetic justice. The universe does not care. In this moment, nothing is not merely a philosophical abstraction, it is the air Frederick breathes, the ground beneath his feet. Critics have long noted that Hemingway's use of nada echoes existential thought years before Sartre or Camus would formalize it. But unlike later existentialists who argue for creating meaning in a meaningless world, Hemingway offers no redemption, no defiant humanism. There is only endurance. This bleakness was forged in the crucible of World War I, a conflict so grotesquely disproportionate in cause and effect that it shattered Enlightenment faith in progress, reason, and civilization. When Hemingway began writing A Farewell to Arms in the late 1920s, he was not merely recounting a love story set during wartime, he was excavating the psychological ruins left behind. The novel took nearly 7 years to complete, with Hemingway rewriting the ending 34 times. That obsession speaks to more than perfectionism, it reflects a struggle to find the right tone, the precise language to convey what words can barely touch. Grief, disillusionment, the collapse of belief. Historically, the Italian front where much of the novel unfolds was one of the most brutal and least remembered theaters of the Great War. Between 1915 10-0 and 1918 10-0. Italy fought Austria-Hungary across the Isonzo River, launching 11 offensives with staggering losses. At the Battle of Caporetto, 1917 10-0, which forms the backdrop of Frederick Henry's retreat. An Austro-German breakthrough caused the near-total collapse of the Italian army. Over 300,000 soldiers deserted or were captured. Roads clogged with retreating troops were bombed from the air, strafed by machine guns. Discipline disintegrated. Officers were murdered by their own men. It was during this chaos that Frederick is wounded not heroically in combat, but accidentally, buried by an artillery shell while serving spaghetti. The irony is deliberate, war doesn't distinguish between courage and absurdity. Heroism is irrelevant. Hemingway himself experienced this firsthand. In 1918 10-0, at age 19, he volunteered as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross on the Italian front. He was stationed near Fossalta di Piave when a mortar round exploded beside him, wounding him severely in both legs. He crawled under fire to drag a wounded soldier to safety, earning the Italian Silver Medal of Bravery, but spent months recovering in a Milan hospital, where he fell in love with Agnes von Kurowski, an American nurse 7 years his senior. Their romance, intense and tender, ended when she wrote to break things off, engaged to another man. This personal wound became the emotional blueprint for A Farewell to Arms. Yet Hemingway did not write the novel immediately. He waited nearly a decade, distilling memory into myth, transforming Agnes into Catherine Barclay not as betrayal, but as artistic necessity. The real tragedy wasn't the lost love, it was the realization that even the purest feelings are fragile under pressure, vulnerable to time, distance, and the indifferent turns of fate. Catherine Barclay is often misunderstood as a passive, idealized woman, a mere projection of male desire. But closer reading reveals complexity. She begins the novel grieving her fiancé, killed in the war, wearing his uniform as a nurse. Her early flirtation with Frederick feels performative, almost desperate, an attempt to fill the void. "I'm having a strange life," she says, "and I don't expect anything." There's weariness in her voice, a recognition of life's instability. As their relationship deepens, she becomes more assertive, decisive. She arranges their escape to Switzerland, insists on defying military orders, plans their future with quiet determination. When she says, "You're my religion," it's not submission, it's substitution. With God absent and war senseless, love becomes the last sanctuary. But Hemingway never lets us forget how precarious that sanctuary is. Their happiness is built on evasion, geographical, emotional, moral. They flee to Switzerland not just from war, but from consequence, from identity, from history itself. Switzerland, often seen as a haven, becomes in the novel a liminal space, beautiful but sterile, peaceful but disconnected. The snow-capped Alps offer visual purity, but also isolation. Their cabin is warm, their days quiet, yet tension lingers beneath the surface. Catherine's pregnancy, initially a symbol of hope, gradually takes on ominous weight. The joy of new life clashes with the ever-present specter of death. Hemingway subtly foreshadows the tragedy. Catherine admits fear about childbirth, saying, "I'm afraid of the rain because sometimes I see me dead in it." This line, simple and haunting, ties together the novel's central symbols: love, death, rain, nothingness. Her premonition isn't melodrama, it's psychological realism. In a world where meaning is eroded, intuition becomes prophecy. The childbirth scene is one of the most harrowing in modern literature, not because of graphic detail, but because of its clinical detachment. Hemingway strips away sentimentality. The doctors are calm, efficient, indifferent. Complications arise. Catherine hemorrhages, but Frederick is kept waiting outside, powerless. When he finally enters, she is already dying. Her last words, "I'm not a bit afraid. It's just a dirty trick," are devastating in their understatement. There's no grand speech, no reconciliation with fate. Just a quiet acknowledgement of betrayal by life itself. And then she's gone. The doctor confirms it, and Frederick asks the inevitable question, "Is there anything you want me to do?" A bureaucratic inquiry in the face of abyss. The system continues. Life goes on. But for Frederick, everything has stopped. This moment crystallizes what scholars call the Hemingway Code hero, a figure defined not by victory, but by grace under pressure. The Code hero does not win, he endures. He faces pain, loss, and absurdity without flinching, without lying to himself. He lives by personal honor, emotional honesty, and stoic restraint. Frederick Henry embodies this ideal, but with a crucial difference: unlike Santiago in The Old Man and the Sea, he achieves no symbolic triumph. His farewell is not to arms alone, but to illusion, to hope, to love. He survives, but survival is not victory. In this way, a farewell to arms subverts the very code it appears to celebrate. The novel's title, drawn from a 16th-century poem by George Peele, "Beauty, sweetness, goodness. In her person shone / and whatsoever else is fair and fair, / with all these did my charming mistress crown. / to whom I gave a farewell to arms," carries layers of irony. Peele's poem is a romantic dedication, a knight laying down his sword for love. Hemingway repurposes it. Frederick does lay down his arms, deserting the war to be with Catherine, but love does not save him. The farewell is futile. The arms return not as weapons, but as the crushing weight of existence. The title becomes elegiac, hollowed out by experience. Critics have debated whether the novel is ultimately nihilistic. Some argue that the love between Frederick and Catherine, however brief, offers a fleeting but genuine refuge, a human connection that momentarily defeats the void. Others maintain that even this is illusory, that the novel dismantles romance as thoroughly as it dismantles patriotism. What makes A Farewell to Arms endure is that it refuses to resolve this tension. It holds both truths: love is beautiful, and it is insufficient. War is evil, but so is the silence that follows it. Modernist context further illuminates the novel's innovations. Published in 1929, 10-0, it emerged alongside works by Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and T.S. Eliot, all experimenting with fragmentation, subjectivity, and the breakdown of narrative coherence. Like them, Hemingway rejected Victorian omniscience. His narrator is limited, fallible, emotionally repressed. Time shifts without warning. Dialogue dominates, often carrying the entire emotional burden of a scene. Description is minimal, yet each detail: the texture of mud on boots, the smell of ether in hospitals, the taste of wine in a tin cup feels monumental because it is chosen with precision. This is modernism not as stylistic flourish, but as existential necessity. In a world where grand narratives have collapsed, only small, concrete things remain trustworthy. The influence of journalism is also unmistakable. Hemingway worked as a reporter for the Kansas City Star and later as a foreign correspondent. The paper's style guide famously emphasized short sentences, active verbs, clarity, and avoidance of adjectives. These principles shaped his fiction. In A Farewell to Arms, every sentence functions like a news report, factual, unembellished, cumulative. Yet within this austerity lies profound emotion. Consider the passage where Frederick describes packing his bags before fleeing to Switzerland. I packed the pajamas and the coats and the other things that were on the bed. I did not need to pack the shirts because they were in the drawers. The banality of the act folding clothes, organizing drawers contrasts violently with the magnitude of what he's doing, abandoning his country, his duty, his former self. The emotional weight is carried not in commentary, but in the silence between actions. Another overlooked aspect is the novel's treatment of masculinity. Frederick is not a traditional hero. He drinks, he avoids deep conversation, he suppresses emotion, but these traits are not glorified. They are symptoms of trauma. His famous line, "I was always embarrassed by the words sacred, glorious, and sacrifice," reflects not cynicism, but exhaustion. He has seen too many young men die for empty abstractions. The novel quietly critiques the culture of stoic manhood, showing how emotional repression leads to isolation. When Catherine dies, Frederick cannot cry because he has spent his life learning not to feel. His final walk in the rain is the culmination of this, utterly alone, not because others reject him, but because he has walled himself off from connection. Female characters beyond Catherine also reveal deeper societal currents. Miss Van Kampen, the head nurse, represents institutional rigidity and moral judgment. She suspects Frederick of drinking alcohol, for medicinal purposes, and uses it as grounds to punish him. Reflecting the temperance movement and broader anxieties about youth, morality, and authority in post-war America. Helen Ferguson, Catherine's friend, serves as a foil, cynical, worldly, aware of the risks of wartime romance. When she warns Catherine, "You'll get yourself into trouble," she speaks not just of scandal, but of emotional devastation. Her skepticism underscores the novel's central tension: is love worth the risk of annihilation? Religious symbolism is present but inverted. The priest at the mess table speaks of faith, humility, and peace, but is mocked by the other officers. Frederick listens with interest, but never converts. Churches appear throughout the novel not as places of solace, but as ruins, shelters, or backdrops for secular encounters. When Frederick and Catherine visit the Duomo in Milan, they admire its architecture, not its sanctity. The absence of God is palpable. If the novel has a theology, it is negative theology, the divine understood through absence. Catherine's death in a hospital, surrounded by science and failing medicine, rather than a church or home, reinforces this: modernity has replaced ritual with procedure, and still cannot prevent suffering. The novel's publication history also shaped its reception. Serialized in Scribner's magazine in 1929 10-0, it was heavily censored, particularly the scenes involving sex and profanity. The full text appeared only in book form, leading to controversy. Some praised its honesty, others condemned its pessimism. The Catholic Church placed it on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. Yet it sold rapidly, resonating with a generation that had lived through war or inherited its shadows. Veterans recognized its truth. Nurses recalled the hospitals. Lovers felt its ache. It became a defining text of the lost generation, not because it explained them, but because it mirrored their silence. Over time, A Farewell to Arms has been adapted into film, theater, and opera, though none have fully captured its interiority. The 1932 10-0 film starring Gary Cooper simplified the themes, adding a redemptive tone. Later adaptations struggled with the same challenge: how to visualize what Hemingway leaves unseen. The power of the novel resists dramatization because its essence is omission. You cannot show the iceberg submerged bulk, you can only imply it. Today, the novel remains urgent. In an age of endless wars, algorithmic alienation, and ecological crisis, its meditation on impermanence and the fragility of meaning feels newly relevant. When Frederick says, "The world breaks everyone," and adds, "those that will not be broken it kills," it reads less like fatalism and more like prophecy. Yet within that darkness, there is clarity. Hemingway does not lie. He does not offer false comfort. He looks directly at the void, and in doing so, he allows readers to confront their own fears, their own losses, their own rain-soaked goodbyes. The legacy of A Farewell to Arms extends beyond literature. It influenced generations of writers, from Raymond Carver's minimalist stories to Tim O'Brien's Vietnam narratives and the things they carried. Its DNA runs through anti-war films like Platoon and Come and See, where beauty and horror coexist in single frames. Even in music, its ethos echoes in Leonard Cohen's Whispered Confessions, in Nick Cave's Ballads of Love and Ruin. But perhaps its greatest contribution is ethical. In a culture obsessed with resolution, positivity, and closure, A Farewell to Arms dares to say, some wounds do not heal. Some losses cannot be redeemed. Some goodbyes have no reply. And that's okay. You can still walk in the rain. You can still say the words, even if no one hears them. You can still love, knowing it might end in nothing. That is not weakness. That is courage. And so the iceberg floats on, silent, massive, eternal, its true shape known only to those willing to stare at the water and imagine what lies beneath. One of the most enduring aspects of A Farewell to Arms is its precise, almost surgical use of setting, not merely as backdrop but as psychological mirror. The novel moves through sharply defined geographical and emotional zones, from the frozen front lines near the Isonzo River, where snow blankets both earth and conscience, to the chaotic retreat at Caporetto, where order dissolves into mud and panic. And finally to the sterile quiet of a Swiss hospital room, where silence becomes the loudest sound of all. Each location marks a stage in Frederick's disengagement from war and gradual immersion into a private world of love and dread. Hemingway's own experience as an ambulance driver on the Italian front in 1918 10-0, where he was wounded by mortar fire and spent months recovering in Milan, lends these settings an authenticity that transcends mere realism. He doesn't describe the war, he recreates its rhythm, the long stretches of boredom punctuated by sudden violence, the gallows humor among soldiers, the way time distorts under stress. The Italian campaign during World War I remains one of the least understood theaters of the conflict, yet it was among the most brutal. Between 1915 10-0 and 1917 10-0, 12 battles were fought along the Isonzo River, with minimal territorial gains and over 500,000 casualties on the Italian side alone. The terrain, steep alpine passes, jagged karst plateaus, made traditional warfare nearly impossible. Soldiers climbed cliffs under fire, froze in high-altitude trenches, or drowned in mudslides after days of rain. This sense of futility permeates the novel. When Frederick says, "I was always embarrassed by the words sacred, glorious, and sacrifice," he speaks not just for himself but for an entire generation disillusioned by nationalist rhetoric that glorified slaughter. The abstract ideals used to justify war, honor, patriotism, duty, crumble when faced with the sight of a friend dying slowly from gangrene, or a child killed in a bombardment of a civilian town. Hemingway filters this historical reality through understatement. There are no grand battle scenes, no heroic charges. Instead, we get fragmented moments, a priest quietly drinking wine in a corner, a soldier complaining about boots, a nurse adjusting a bandage while humming. These details accumulate like sediment, forming a moral landscape beneath the surface narrative. The famous retreat scene, often cited as one of the greatest passages in American literature, is not driven by action but by a growing awareness of absurdity. As Frederick and his fellow drivers abandon their posts, they do so not out of cowardice but because the chain of meaning has snapped. Orders make no sense. Commanders flee. Men shoot at each other in the dark, mistaking allies for enemies. In this chaos, Frederick makes his real decision not when he deserts formally, but when he chooses Catherine over country, intimacy over ideology. This pivot underscores another key dimension of the novel, its subversion of traditional masculinity. Unlike earlier war stories that celebrated stoic heroism or redemptive sacrifice, A Farewell to Arms presents courage as withdrawal. To walk away from duty, to reject the uniform, to prioritize love in a world demanding loyalty to the state, these are acts of quiet rebellion. Frederick does not storm enemy lines, he swims away from his own army. His act of defiance is not loud but liquid, blending into the river's current. This redefinition of heroism aligns with what later critics would call the Hemingway Code hero, a figure defined not by victory but by grace under pressure, by dignity in defeat. Yet even this code is questioned. By the end, grace offers no protection. Catherine dies. The child dies. All that remains is rain and absence. Catherine Barclay, too, has been re-evaluated over time. Early readings often dismissed her as passive, idealized a fantasy of feminine devotion. But more recent scholarship sees her as complex, even radical. Her initial mourning for a dead fiancé mirrors the collective grief of Europe. Her relationship with Frederick begins as role-play, "I'm not going to be your girl. You're going to be my boy," but evolves into something deeply reciprocal. She smokes, drinks, takes initiative in their romance, unusual for female characters of the era. And crucially, she articulates some of the novel's bleakest truths: there's only us, isn't there? She asks, encapsulating the existential isolation at the heart of modernism. Her death in childbirth, a common fate in pre-antibiotic medicine, is rendered with chilling detachment. No melodrama. No last words. Just a slow fade, followed by Frederick's solitary walk back into the rain. It is one of the most devastating endings in literature precisely because it refuses catharsis. The novel's structure reinforces this refusal. Divided into 5 books, it follows a downward spiral: enlistment, romance, desertion, refuge, loss. Each section strips away another illusion. The war is meaningless. Institutions lie. Love cannot save you. Even Switzerland, the neutral haven, proves no sanctuary. This architectural precision reveals Hemingway's craftsmanship. Every sentence serves the dissent. Dialogue avoids exposition. Emotions are buried in gesture: a hand squeeze, a changed subject, a glass raised without reason. Critics have noted how often characters drink in the novel not for joy, but to fill silence, to delay speech, to numb anticipation. Alcohol functions as both social glue and psychological shield, mirroring the broader theme of evasion. Moreover, the novel's language itself performs its philosophy. Short sentences. Concrete nouns. Active verbs. No metaphors unless they arise from immediate sensation. When Frederick describes the autumn leaves falling, so that you knew the tree was dead, the image carries symbolic weight, but only because it emerges from observation, not ornament. This style, forged in Hemingway's journalism, became a model for 20th-century prose. Writers like Joan Didion and James Salter adopted its restraint, recognizing that emotional power often lies in what is withheld. The famous Iceberg Theory, 7/8 submerged, applies not just to content but to syntax. Meaning forms below the surface, through implication, rhythm, silence. Historically, the novel arrived at a turning point. Published in 1929, 10-0, it appeared between the collapse of the stock market and the rise of fascism, when the promises of progress lay in ruins. Readers recognized in Frederick's journey a reflection of their own uncertainty. The Lost Generation, Gertrude Stein's label, embraced by Hemingway, was not just a literary cohort but a cultural diagnosis. People who came of age during the war and found themselves spiritually orphaned. They distrusted institutions, mocked tradition, sought meaning in fleeting experiences. A Farewell to Arms gave voice to that condition without romanticizing it. There is no nostalgia here, no longing for a return to innocence. Only clear-eyed seeing. Even the title resists sentimentality. A farewell to arms echoes religious farewells. A farewell to flesh, perhaps, or a farewell to worldly things, but replaces spiritual transcendence with emptiness. The arms he leaves behind are both weapons and embraces. He renounces war and love in the same breath, because both demand faith he can no longer afford. The final line: it was raining. God knows what it was raining. Denies divine order. Rain falls indiscriminately, on the living and the dead, the guilty and the innocent. Nature offers no justice, no meaning. And yet, Frederick walks on. Not toward hope, but forward. That distinction matters. In classrooms today, the novel continues to challenge students raised on narratives of resilience and recovery. It teaches that literature can bear witness without offering solutions. That truth may be unbearable and still worth telling.